Sam Ross is the David Boaz Resident Writing Fellow at Young Voices and a nationally published political analyst and trained public relations professional. Good morning, Sam. How are you?
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. It's good to have you back. All right. So just start off with the basics for me. Fill me in on the big bill AI moratorium.
Yes. So Trump's one big beautiful bill, the reconciliation budget that's currently passing through Congress, is now in the Senate, contains language that would establish a 10-year federal preemption on state-level AI regulation. And what that means for listeners that aren't too familiar is the federal government is hoping to get itself involved in what has become thousands and thousands of AI bills going through state legislators across the country that are really threatening to hamper down on the growth and innovation of America's tech sector. Currently, it is in the Senate, and it will most likely be tied to broadband funding, so it'll be a bit of a funding contingency situation. But what it's hoping to do is stop the states from doing so much regulation.
Okay, got it. All right. So why do you support the 10-year AI moratorium as it's written in the big, beautiful bill?
Yeah, I think what we've seen over really the past 2 years is this onslaught of state-level legislation is really potentially going to completely stop our AI growth. Luckily, Governor Gavin Newsom vetoed legislation in California, but it appears likely that New York will pass a similar bill to what was the California's SB 1047, which would have really heavily regulated based off of the model size with a ton of preemptive disclosure mandates, safety reviews, reporting requirements, all sorts of things that we see oftentimes coming from the left on issues like vehicles, energy, and other innovation. And what's really important is that we win this AI race against China. It's really important that we are the ones creating the AI that is used for the world, and that we create it in a way that it is free, it's accessible to people, it promotes our common values of democracy and human liberties. And so the United States sitting out this race is simply not an option. And this is the best way we're going to do it, is by having the federal government step in and say, look, AI and the internet is used by Americans writ large. It's not a state-by-state issue, really.
Okay. So, Sam, how do you respond to the concern that's come up that this is less about innovation and actually more about deregulation?
Yeah, well, I think that deregulation and innovation tend to come hand in hand. We see a spur of growth and really a spur of new inventions, of entrepreneurship and startup and creation when we keep the government's hands off the companies and the actors and really focus on maybe specific harms for individuals. I think that there's federal legislation to target misuse of AI that would be in a criminal sense. There's also likely to be legislation focused on property rights, intellectual property rights, and really targeting consumer harms, fraud and legitimate instances of criminal behavior, but hampering this all down in a regulatory framework to try to preventatively stop what is a rapidly accelerating sector of technology is really misplaced at this point.
Sure.
Hi, Sam. This is Casey. I just wanted to ask you a question. On one of the biggest critiques is that the moratorium strips away states' ability to protect their residents. Why do you believe federal consistency should override state autonomy in this case?
Yeah, I think we have to think about how this is really a nationwide issue. It's not a specific instance of, certain websites or AI platforms are only being used by residents in a certain state. They're being used by people across the country. And state actors certainly have a role to play in law enforcement and in addressing, those legitimate crimes and fraud and other concerns that we hold that fall within really current law. They don't need an expansive regulatory framework to get involved with these companies that tend to be, not just in multiple states in the United States, but tend to be international companies and have offices and business across the world. we need to be looking at this from a much broader perspective, and the states are really not in the place to do that right now.
Right.
Sam, let's talk about facial recognition and algorithmic bias. So if states are barred from regulating these tools, then who's responsible for preventing abuse or discrimination?
Yeah, I think that there's many serious concerns on where the line is drawn between growth of technology and use of new technologies to prevent crime, to prevent different challenges, but also our individual liberties, our civil rights as Americans. But that's something that we really need to address as a whole country, and we really need to pass comprehensive privacy regulations, comprehensive civil liberty protections, and that's something that certainly the states may attempt to do on a piecemeal basis, but we need to put the pressure on Congress now to act on that and to get something thorough in so that this is serving all the people and no one's being left behind.
Absolutely.
So how do you reassure everyday people who worry this moratorium leaves them vulnerable to data misuse, misinformation, or deepfakes?
I think that the concerns with what people say, quote unquote, misinformation when it comes to AI is really misplaced. I think that this technology is absolutely no different than the existing internet and social media. And actually, as a matter of fact, generally AI is now being leveraged to correctly identify when misleading claims are being placed on the internet, and most of these fact-check community nodes are really leveraging AI. So I wouldn't be too concerned about that. I certainly think it's reasonable for people to have concerns around their intellectual property, particularly artists, people in the creative spaces, as well as the protections over private information, whether that's your individual accounts or your personal research. And I think that taking a comprehensive look at this and putting the power firmly in the hands of Congress will allow them to enact strong legislation that will preserve all those rights properly and balance them with the needs for growth and innovation of AI.
We're talking with Sam Raus, Young Voices contributor on Trump's big, beautiful bill, AI Moratorium. So, Sam, the bill links AI regulation freezes to $500 million in broadband grants. Is that an ethical incentive, or do you think that states are being financially coerced into compliance?
I think this is the best measure to incentivize the states to take their own action and leave it up to their own choice, ultimately, whether or not to go into this. Frankly, the broadband legislation that we currently have, our various programs, are very likely to begin to be shifted more towards a free market perspective, letting broadband and the telecommunications sector be driven by private enterprise, not a government agency or program. But I certainly think that no different than we have strings attached to road funding for drinking age regulations.
Yeah,
I think this is really a similar framework and is a pretty commonplace thing to do for us to incentivize states to adopt a nationwide framework on regulation.
absolutely.
All right, Sam, I have another question for you. Is there a danger that in racing to complete globally, we lose sight of protecting civil liberties at home?
I think it's really the opposite. What we're seeing is the AI that is coming out of China is really the opposite of our basic American values, and not just liberty, but in human freedom and flourishing. Generally, we see DeepSeek and these other platforms will censor questions about the Tiananmen Square massacre, censor questions about the Uyghur concentration camps in China, whereas American AI is very open and very supportive of our different democratic ideals, our different basic foundations. And so while there is certainly steps to be made to, yes, protect our data, protect our individuals when they're using it and its use cases, American AI is much more likely to spread free information and our basic ideals across the world in a way that's really healthy and good for the globe.
Sam, public opinion on this seems really divided. So why do you think that this bill hasn't really resonated with more local leaders and voters?
I think that there's a lot of lies being spewed around this, a lot of special interests seeking to prevent this legislation because the state regulations that's being advocated right now are really an act of regulatory capture. They are a number of big entrenched firms, sometimes not the biggest firms, but their competitors, seeking to create regulatory frameworks that only these big businesses that have dozens of lawyers and giant compliance teams can meet under, and it will prevent them from having any market competition. So I think that a lot of the discourse is being distorted around this. I think, the average American has not heard that much about this beyond maybe some talking points said to them. And we're really not considering the wider scope of what we need to do in order to keep this a fair and open marketplace.
Sure. So finally, Sam, what would you say to someone who's listening right now who may be a bit skeptical about this? Why should they reconsider?
I think that skeptics are, naturally concerned with how rapidly this technology is changing, how rapidly it's getting adopted into our lives. But we need to temper that with thinking that taking big controlling action by government regulation is always the answer. I think that everyone can certainly calm down and recognize that AI is not coming that fast. We're still each learning how to do this. There's a phase-in process, but that this really is the future to our country and will serve so many different needs that we can't even recognize just yet, and that letting the states whittle away at this through state legislators that are frankly operating on a part-time basis, not using much research beyond some lobbyist talking points. That's not the way to do this. We need Congress to act completely and let the Trump administration and the current Republican Congress address this altogether.
Absolutely. Sam, thank you so much for joining the program today. This is an awesome conversation, and we look forward to having you on again.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, take care. All right, Sam Ross, Young Voices contributor and David Boaz resident writing fellow at Young Voices and a nationally published political analyst and trained public relations professional on Trump's big, beautiful bill AI moratorium. We'll have more local and national news after this. This is KAFF News Radio 93.5 and AM 930 News, Sports,
Community.